attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Hi everyone, this is Andy Steele. Thanks for tuning in. Today the guest is Ted Walter. He's back, and in this interview he talks about the High-Rise Safety Initiative, which, if it gets passed, means that the New York City Department of Buildings is going to have the responsibility to investigate all high-rise building collapses that occur in the future, and all high-rise building collapses that occurred on or after September 11th, 2001. It excludes Towers 1 and 2, but it does mean Building 7, folks. So stay tuned for that. This is a great idea, one that's going to have a very good chance for passing if we all get behind it. So here we are, life ticks along, and we are slowly but surely making progress thanks to folks like you out there who have been beating the drum and been sounding the alarm for years. Again, this movement includes everyone from the left to the right, people of all different religions, races, because the truth unites people. Alright, science unites people. This is not a political issue, this is about investigating a mass murder. So we got a few news stories up here that I want to go over. First up, we have an article up at ae911truth.org titled AE 9/11 Truth to Address Major Truth Conference. And it starts out, we have been encouraged to speak at the United We Stand Truth in Music Festival by host Free and Equal at UCLA's Pauley Pavilion in Los Angeles on May the 10th, 2014. The UWS Festival will showcase music as well as panels of musicians, actors, writers, journalists, and other speakers. Fundraising for this major event began in Indiegogo and ran through February 15th. We encouraged everyone through our social media platforms to support the event at Indiegogo. You can also reserve your tickets. It will sell out. We have the opportunity here to bring 9/11 truth from the World Trade Center to more than 1,000 folks who are newcomers to the explosive evidence. And folks, they're going to have musical artists like Immortal Technique and the Wu-Tang Clan who are going to be performing there. And I tell you what, I mean, events like this are really exciting. I remember when We Are Change a few years ago, well, maybe it wasn't a few years ago, it feels like it, to me, it might have been 2008 or 2007, but they had an event out there in New York City where they had speakers during the day, and Richard Gage was one of them, I remember, talking about various elements of the 9/11 crime, and then in the evening, it became a party, and they had rappers there like KRS-One, who actually spoke during the day too and gave a great speech. I've played it here on the show before, talking about how we all have to look past our petty differences with each other and unite as a movement. Great speech, and I believe it's out there on the internet, but he spoke during the day and then he performed at night, and it was a good time. You know, and then the night concluded with a march around the city. It ended in Times Square, where everybody was standing there in their black t-shirts and holding signs. So it was a good time. You're doing good work by getting the message out there, but you know, when you get around other like-minded people, it recharges your batteries, and that's a very important thing. I'll tell you what, folks, if I had the ability to get out to Los Angeles myself and attend this thing, I would, just to hang out and meet other people, other like-minded people. And again, there's going to be newcomers who are going to be attracted by the celebrity, by the Wu-Tang Clan and Immortal Technique. So this is a great opportunity. Again, the Pauley Pavilion in Los Angeles, May the 10th. Be there or be square. And it says in the article, reserve your tickets, it will sell out. So if you want to learn more about it, go to ae911truth.org and check that out. And we also have this article up here at 9/11 Blogger. It's titled, The Sound of Silence in Academia Connected to 9/11. Lars Schall interviews Adnan Zubari. And it talks about that film, 9/11 in the Academic Community. We've talked about it here on this show before. I've previewed the trailer. And you can read the interview, hear more about it. But I think this is such an important topic. And just talking about the social pressures that people have to face for knowing this evidence, knowing the truth, and speaking out about it. And I think that's a symptom of the fact that there's not enough people speaking out about it. You know, when we talk about people who have faced professional pressures because of the evidence and their participation in the movement. I mean, people like Stephen Jones, who essentially had to retire early because of his outspoken activism and talking about Building 7 publicly. But there's been lots of people who've had to make sacrifices in this movement. But there's less and less of them now as it becomes more accepted. But I think a really interesting aspect of this entire period in history, and I don't hear enough people in 9/11 Truth talk about it, is just some of these spin-off issues. What do you do if this comes up? What do you do if you get a question in class, if 9/11 comes up and they ask you, why did the buildings collapse on 9/11? What do you say? Do you avoid it? I mean, if you know the truth and you've watched experts speak out and you've watched Blueprint for Truth yourself, or you've done your own research and you've concluded that it's absolutely impossible for these buildings to have come down without pre-planted explosives being involved, how do you address that? How do you address that very legitimate question from some kid who may not have even been alive when 9/11 happened? Do you lie to protect your career and compromise your integrity? And what if you're a student? What if you're a student and some issue like this comes up? I've talked about that before on the show. What if the correct answer on the test, or the quote-unquote correct answer on the test, and the question about 9/11 is they attacked us because of our freedom. They hate our freedom. Do you give that answer? Or do you tell the truth? And how do you deal with the system's punishment and the system's pressure that they want to bring down on you for doing that? What do you do if you're a parent and your kid encounters an issue like this? It's all very interesting, but these are the things that people have to face. But I think that people staying silent makes the situation even worse. Folks become more emboldened when they hear somebody speaking out. And if anybody who's been involved with this movement for any number of years knows this, is that people are more open with you about their own skepticism regarding 9/11 when you're alone with them. But when you're in big groups, they tend to get more nervous. They tend to be more quiet. They tend to glance at each other and hope that the conversation steers into another direction. But that doesn't mean that you stay silent, though. Because the more you talk about it, the more accepted it becomes. And the fact is, it is more acceptable now to discuss this issue socially than it was back in 2007, 2008. And that's because of the efforts of people like you out there bringing the issue to as many people as possible. So good job. And finally, we have this article from Fran Schur. She was our guest last week. She's got the new installment of her series called Why Do Good People Become Silent or Worse About 9/11? And this particular chapter is titled Doublethink. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from this article to give you an idea of what it's about. It says, doublethink is not a term accepted in psychology's lexicon, although it should be, in my opinion, as it is a common psychological defense mechanism. Doublethink is a concept that has established itself in our culture, describing well the capacity of the human mind to contort when it hears a resolutely pronounced official account on any issue, 9/11 being only one example, and at the same time is aware of evidence contradictory to this official pronouncement. Doublethink has the same meaning as another Orwellian term, black-white, which means the ability to claim brazenly that black is white in bold-faced contradiction to irrefutable evidence. For example, exasperated with a friend, I declared, I know you believe that 9/11 was a false flag operation and that we are in the Middle East for natural resources, but you keep speaking of the war on terror as though it's the real reason we have invaded Afghanistan and Iraq and why we now use drones to kill so-called terrorists. Why do you do this? She shot back testily, well, we are surrounded by the official story. It's everywhere. The TV, the newspapers, our teachers and friends at school, work. What am I supposed to do? Doublethink was her survival strategy, insanity to stay sane. And that's very interesting, folks, because I'm very careful with the words I use, too, and I'm very aware of these contradictions. And, when you're trying to talk to people about these issues, you have to use terms that they are familiar with. Like, for instance, the war on terror. They're very familiar with that term, and so what do you do in order to try to reach them and discuss these issues, but you don't want to use these terms that the system has spit out to try to propagandize you? Well, I just changed the word slightly. I don't say the war on terror, I say the war of terror. That's what it is. The United States' war of terror, following the false information, the false story surrounding the building, or surrounding 9/11, and the fairy tale that we were sold that day, that physics stood down. So it's the war of terror. Yeah, I don't say that Building 7 collapsed. Unless I slip. Very, very rarely will I make that slip, though. I say it was destroyed, because that's what happened when Building 7 was destroyed. I don't use their word. I don't use their fake description of what happened. I never say the collapse of Building 7. I say the destruction of Building 7, because that's what happened. It was destroyed with pre-planted explosives. If it collapsed, that would mean NIST was right, and they aren't right. So that is a way of getting around doublethink, is just readjust the words to what it is. Don't go along with what they say, and just change it slightly so that people recognize what you're talking about. But don't be afraid of even just stating it for what it is. A fairy tale. Saying the government's official fairy tale. And see, that's what they really can't stand. They really can't stand it when you stick it back in their faces. When you're blunt, when you don't tiptoe, when you don't beg for their forgiveness for even talking about it, when you don't proceed your question with some kind of weak, oh, don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist for asking you about this, but you just state it and you call them on their game, on their bluff. For instance, I want you to listen to this call that was made to C-SPAN's Washington Journal. The guest is Chris Murphy from Connecticut. That he was on there discussing the Ukrainian situation and giving his narrative on why he thinks that there should be certain sanctions against the Ukraine for what's going on there.
Establish a new government. Russia doesn't like that because Yanukovych should become their guy in Kyiv, but it doesn't make the government illegitimate.
Here is Jamie from Michigan, Democrats line. Good morning.
Good morning. How can any member of Congress pretend that the American government has the credibility to judge other countries when most of them have failed their people by selectively ignoring basic physics and scientific evidence proving that Building 7 was brought down on a controlled demolition on 9/11?
And Senator, you should know this is part of a campaign that calls into this show asking this type of question. You can respond.
Yeah, no, I frankly won't dignify the comment with a response. In Ukraine, the United States, has very specific and real interests. We want a free Ukraine, a unified Ukraine. We ultimately believe that it should be oriented towards Europe because we think that ultimately that's aligned with U.S. interest in terms of our enormous trade relationship with Europe. That's why we care about Ukraine.
Hillsborough, North.
So there you are, folks. The caller asked Chris Murphy how any member of Congress can pretend the American government has the credibility to judge other countries when they haven't addressed the issues surrounding Building 7, which is a big issue, which is the basis, 9/11, the basis for the war of terror, the quote-unquote post-9/11 world. There's another way to avoid doublethink, put quotes around their words. And of course, Chris Murphy just gives his standard answer. I won't dignify that with a response. Of course you can't. Of course you won't. And see, that's why it's important, even if you think you're going to get some really terrible answer from one of these jokers, alright, at least you're inserting it. At least you're reminding the viewers that these people can't be trusted, that these same people going out and trying to sell an agenda to you on one thing, they don't have their own house in order here in the United States. They've deceived you before. They're deceiving you now. They're not really on there advocating for you. So you graffiti their entire message with the words, "Remember Building 7." And that's what you're doing. That's why it's important to insert it as much as you possibly can. And don't let some moderator cry about how it's off topic. It's absolutely on topic. Anytime you're talking about any kind of foreign issues, anytime you're talking about any kind of domestic issues, especially with regards to civil liberties. I mean, this entire event mutilated our history, our destiny. So you're going to remind them. You're going to remind them that this is all based on a lie by injecting this into their discussions. It's a good job to the caller on that. And you got to be unapologetic, folks. You got to think about the world that you're leaving to the next generation. And we talk about these issues, and what do you do if you're a kid? I mean, why does this situation even exist to begin with? Why have we let this situation exist? And even if you've gotten to that cynical point that a lot of people get to, where you just say, forget the world, forget America, people are fools, they deserve what they get. Well, think about the world that the kids live in, the next generation coming up. They didn't create this. And they shouldn't have to deal with this. So for no other reason than speak out, stand up, do what you can for them. Because that's really all that matters. That's really why we're here, is to reproduce. To be fruitful and multiply. So what we're going to do now is what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all of the people who have died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds.
Ted Walters, the founder of the New York City Coalition for Accountability Now. That's an organization he started in 2009 with a group of 9/11 family members to advance the New York City ballot initiative for an independent commission to reinvestigate the 9/11 attacks. He has since served as the manager of Remember Building 7. That's that TV ad campaign that exposed New Yorkers to the destruction of World Trade Center 7. And got Bob McIlvaine and Tony Zamboti on Geraldo, because Geraldo ended up seeing that. So good job there. And Ted was also a co-campaign manager for Rethink 9/11. He's going to be talking about his latest efforts with a new initiative in New York City for 9/11 Truth. So Ted, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Now, even though I've had you on the show before and we talked about this, for first-time listeners, can you briefly tell us a little bit more about yourself and your involvement with this topic of 9/11 Truth?
Absolutely. I, like a lot of people, I started doing my research into 9/11 back in 2006. In the spring of 2006, I read Stephen Jones's paper. I saw Kevin Ryan's presentation. I did a lot of reading on 9/11 research. And, I came to the conclusion within a few weeks of doing my research that the official account of 9/11 was very, very false. And I became, motivated to do something about it. And so in 2008, 2009, I got involved with the New York City 9/11 ballot initiative. I volunteered for a while collecting signatures. For those of you who don't know what that is, that was a ballot initiative sponsored by the New York City 9/11 Truth Group to basically establish a local 9/11 commission to reinvestigate the attacks. And so I got very involved in the petitioning with that. And we carried on into 2009 because we didn't collect quite enough signatures in 2008 to put it on the ballot. And we continued into 2009 and rebranded the initiative as the NYC New York City Coalition for Accountability Now. And we got all the way to 80,000 signatures that year and submitted our petition unfortunately, the city was able to take down our petition, challenging its legality, saying that some of the things we were trying to do were sort of outside the bounds of municipal home rule law in New York State, which is basically the statewide law that allows for local voter initiatives. And so we went to court and we lost in court, and the initiative did not go on the ballot, unfortunately. But we learned a lot of lessons from that, and for a number of years, some of the others that were involved in the campaign and I, sort of kicked around the idea of having another go at it, taking the lessons that we did learn from 2009 and trying to craft a petition that would survive the city's legal challenge and get on the ballot so that the voters of New York could call for a new investigation. And so that's what we've done now. We are sponsoring a new initiative called the High Rise Safety Initiative, which would amend the city charter to require the Department of Buildings to investigate all high-rise building collapses occurring in New York City since September 11, 2001. And so that would apply to the collapse of World Trade Center 7, as well as any collapses that occur in the future, because we all know that there were serious problems with what happened in the weeks and months after 9/11 as far as how the collapses were investigated and with the lack of preservation of evidence. So this initiative would also try to fix those problems so that the city would be required to immediately investigate any collapses.
Well, I'm thinking as you're talking here, and a whole new element that just popped in my head as I listened to you talk or mention this and describe what you're doing, is the fact that you are preventing a situation like what happened with Building 7 from ever happening again, at least in New York City, because it would require them to fully investigate an event just like that if they ever tried to pull it off again. If whoever was involved with the 9/11 attacks tried to rig a building just like Building 7 fell, well, they wouldn't be able to do this because you'd have a proper investigation after that. So that is a brilliant initiative, a brilliant, side effect, if that's the proper word, of your efforts here. Now, you were talking about the NYC CAN and the High Rise Safety Initiative, as I see it, as sort of a sequel to that, the Rocky 2 to the Rocky 1 here. So you talked about some of the things you learned and some of the legal challenges. What was the crux of their legal challenge in the NYC CAN initiative? I mean, was it that certain things that you guys were seeking to reinvestigate were out of New York City's jurisdiction? Am I correct in that?
Yes, that was one of the grounds on which our petition was challenged, is that we were trying to investigate matters that were outside the jurisdiction of New York City that fell under federal jurisdiction. And ultimately, that's what the court found, was that we were trying to investigate issues that are of sort of federal jurisdiction. This time around, that's one of the issues we had. Another issue, which is very unique to the ballot initiative process in New York State, is how you can amend the city charter. Basically, a city charter is a document that lays out the basic structure of your government and the basic sort of duties and powers that each department within your government has. And so the way that this law has been interpreted over the decades in New York is that essentially you have to stick to that. You have to amend the charter in a way that is fit for the charter to be amended. You have to come up with provisions that are reasonable to be in a city charter. So they can't be overly specific in how they direct heads of departments to carry out their duties, or they can't be overly specific in the types of policies that you want departments to have. If you want to amend the charter, you have to do it in such a way that you're sort of generally modifying the duties and powers of each department. And so that's what this approach is doing now. We are amending the duties and the powers of the Department of Buildings in a permanent way, not only to apply to the collapse of World Trade Center 7, but also to any future high-rise collapses. And as far as the jurisdiction goes, we are very confident that any court would find that building collapses within New York City are under the jurisdiction of the local Department of Buildings. That is very clearly stated already in the city charter.
Wow, and I wasn't even prepared to talk about the long-lasting effects of this initiative. Before I was thinking of this simply as a way of reinvestigating what happened with Building 7, but you are basically laying precedent for how something like this would be handled in the future to prevent it from happening again. And I can't state that enough times. That is something that goes along with what I've said so many times on this show. Regardless of how successful we are in getting this crime against our country, against humanity, exposed, I think we'll be successful. But regardless of how successful we are, what we are succeeding in doing is helping stave off something similar to it from happening. Because now the people are waking up. Building 7, all you have to do is say Building 7, and even the detractors, the people who wanted to just viciously guard the official story and believe the official story will automatically defer to, well, I don't think it was a conspiracy. That's the first thing they'll say, even if you just say, Building 7 destruction. It's the first thing that pops in their mind is pre-controlled demolition, pre-planted explosives. So we've managed to get that into the public's mindset. And now you're talking about amending a charter so that certain cogs and wheels within the machine will go into motion if something like this ever happens again. I want to commend you for that, because that is some big picture thinking, some forward progressive thinking in terms of how to just lay the groundwork for protecting America, at least within New York City. I'd like to see all major cities that have any high-rises do something like this in the future. You can get your hands full here, but it could be something that, if successful, expands out so that we never see an event like this happen again. But it makes absolute sense. And then there's a statement on your website saying something to the effect that we should know why buildings fall down. Actually, if I pull up the actual website in front of me, the top of it says, well, I don't have it in front of me anymore, but it says something because it's important. Maybe you'll give me the right statement. But it is important to know this because, and I'm going to ask you, this is going to be my next question, is how a collapse is going to be defined, because there really has not been a collapse like Building 7 ever, other than obviously Building 7 itself. No steel frame high-rise has ever collapsed, and I put that word in quotes, because of fire before or after that day. So moving forward and laying the groundwork for the future here and how an event like this will be investigated in New York City if it ever happens again, what is going to be defined as a collapse? Does it have to be the complete destruction of the building like what we saw with Building 7, or could a partial collapse be included in that?
The language of the petition says that it is in the discretion of the commissioner, but any time the commissioner determines that a substantial portion of a building has collapsed to the ground, he's required to conduct an investigation. And it is actually limited to high rises of 20 stories or more. There are lots of small partial collapses of various types of structures in New York City all the time, often during construction or demolition and things like that. This would apply pretty narrowly to large buildings where all or most of the building collapse. And by the way, just because it is under the discretion of the commissioner, there would be no way around interpreting buildings this to not apply to Building 7. This will absolutely have to apply to World Trade Center 7.
Right, and because it would be for any kind of collapse beginning on September 11th, 2001, any kind of collapse from fire. And I got that quote I was looking for before. It says, New Yorkers deserve answers when a building collapses. Our safety depends on it. So what you're doing is when common sense doesn't exist within an institution, you sometimes have to do campaigns like this to try to force it, almost like implanting common sense into the machine here, or giving it an app for common sense, because we seem to be missing that here in America. And this is the simplicity of that statement at the very top captures it. It captures the whole essence of the 9/11 truth movement when it comes to the controlled demolition of the buildings in New York, or just people who say they are skeptical of it, people who sit on the fence and say, yeah, that Building 7 is really weird They should investigate that. This captures it right here. New Yorkers deserve answers when a building collapses. Our safety depends on it. And I would hate to think that if random fires could just break out and bring a building crashing down on my head if I ever got a job in New York City. So with this idea and what you are doing right now, the sequel, the second round, how was this idea come up with? I mean, at what point, because I remember interviewing people involved with NYC maybe a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and it seemed like it was just something that was done, over with, put in the past, well, we learned, and we're finished now. But now this is having new life brought into it. How did the idea to pursue this and just go with this simple, very kind of neutral focus just on Building 7 and high-rises collapsing in general, how did that idea get come up with, and who ran with the ball?
It was us. It was some of the members of NYC CAN. So Dennis McMahon, the lawyer who represented us in court back in 2009, he was one of the major drivers of this idea, and then myself, and also some election lawyers that we worked with who really understood, who understand municipal home rule law very well, and who were able to advise us on, what would fly based on the election law and what wouldn't. And so this is what we came out with. And we spent, about 3 months going back and forth on the petition, making sure that, it was every aspect of it has been thought through exhaustively to make sure that it will overcome a legal challenge from the city should that happen. We actually feel so good about the petition being legally valid this time around that we'll not be surprised if the city actually doesn't challenge it. We just don't, it's kind of the knee-jerk reaction of the city to challenge any ballot initiative that comes forth, but we think this one's pretty hard to attack.
Now, with that, and I'm going to skip ahead in my questions here because I wanted to ask this, and this goes along with what you're saying in terms of the city trying to challenge any kind of ballot initiatives, and certainly it seems to be a prerequisite for anybody working in government or corporate media to defer to guarding the official story in any situation that challenges it. So what kind of obstacles do you think that they might throw up in front of you? How do you plan to overcome those obstacles?
I think that the only obstacle that the city could put in our way is the legal challenge. They can try to claim that certain provisions of the petition are not legally valid, in which case we would have to go to court and defend the petition. And as I've said, I think we are very confident that if the city does challenge it, we will overcome that challenge. We've looked at all of the cases that have happened in New York State over the last some 70 years, and we've looked at the initiatives that got on the ballot and those that didn't, and ours really falls in line with all of the initiatives that got on the ballot, and it avoids all the potential pitfalls to having a legally valid charter amendment. Other than that, down the line, there may be people that would spend a lot of money to defeat the initiative at the ballot come election day. We're pretty confident that if we do get on the ballot, that we will see, an outpouring of support for the initiative from lots of people all over the country and all over the world, and that we'll be able to raise millions of dollars to win this initiative and to properly educate New Yorkers about the collapse of Building 7 and about the need for the high-rise safety initiative. But that really brings me to what to the now of what's most important. In order to get this initiative on the ballot, we have to collect 110,000 signatures from New York City voters between May and August, and that requires a pretty large staff of petitioners going out every day and collecting the signatures. And the initiative overall, that petitioning process, which we also did back in 2009, is going to cost around $250,000. And so we are in the process of raising money for that. And we first announced the campaign back on February 1st, And in the last 3 weeks, we've raised $20,000, which is great. But that's only the first step, and we have another 3.5 months to raise the rest of it. And so I just want to say to anybody who supports a new investigation, no matter what, we can't guarantee success with this initiative, but it's a very good opportunity. It is worth, it's worth $25, it's worth $50 or $10, whatever you can give, just to give this initiative a chance of getting on the ballot. We hope that people will see that as a small sacrifice in order to get this on the ballot. And we're counting on everybody who wants to see a new investigation, even if, people can nitpick about the specifics of the petition, or they, maybe they prefer an international approach or what have you, but, give this one a shot, give it a shot. And I think we have a very good chance, if we can get the signatures, to get this on the ballot.
Right. It's a world war for 9/11 truth, folks. And so that battle is taking place on every front, internationally and locally. And here locally, we're talking about the place where a large chunk of 9/11 happened, and with the biggest smoking gun of the whole 9/11 crime itself being Building 7. This is what it focuses on, and this has a very good chance. And I hear people always say, why isn't somebody doing something? Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why isn't somebody doing something? Folks, I'm bringing you people every week who are doing something, and this is a big something. This has a great potential. And so, again, they need your support. The website is highrisesafetynyc.org, spelled just the way it sounds, highrisesafetynyc.org, and you go on there, and it gives you all the instructions to sign the petition, and tells you about it and how to donate as well. So folks can check that out. I want to ask you, because we were talking about the obstacles. Now, it sounds like you just said you got certain deadlines, and I don't even want. I hesitate to even put the idea in the other side's mind, but I do want to ask this question of you. With the deadline coming up, what's to keep them from deciding that it's not legal and then binding the whole thing in court for a long time, just keeping it perpetually, with a zillion lawyers keeping it perpetually in the books in court and making you miss the deadline? I mean, is there any kind of legal safety mechanism to keep that from happening, or is that a concern?
Well, the main phase in which the city could challenge the legality of the petition is at this early stage. Once we submit the petition, that's really the city's chance to try to stop it from happening. And if we overcome that challenge in court, it automatically will become a lot more difficult for the city not to carry out this initiative once it's passed by the voters in November. I don't know what the potential scenarios are. I think maybe what you're envisioning is that once this is passed, the city of New York will somehow file a suit or somehow simply not comply with the requirements of the charter amendment. And that, there are laws that guard against, governments, whether city or state or federal, from not carrying out the laws that are, that have been passed. You can always debate the chances of winning that type of suit. We think in this case, with the local government, with a very clear mandate, and with the politics around it, that I think there would be a lot of political pressure on the city to actually carry out the charter amendment and conduct a real investigation into the collapse of Building 7. That it would be hard for the city to get away with not carrying it out. I think one of the more real challenges or risks that we have to guard against is the possibility that the Department of Buildings would not conduct an honest investigation into the collapse of Building 7. We've seen that happen with NIST. Obviously, NIST's investigation of Building 7 is fraudulent, and we do believe with the large body of evidence that's been assembled over the years, and the political pressure that will, come to bear during the election, that in the aftermath of the election, once it passes, it will be hard for the city not to conduct an honest investigation. And we will be able to force the Department of Buildings to do it the right way.
Well, an honest investigation would be complete transparency and following the scientific method, not just creating some cartoon with a computer and then hiding all your records that went into making it. And I would like to see that defined, with this investigation. Yeah, I am always for doing anything. I think that anytime you create any kind of friction in the wheels of the system, you're winning. Even if it's just, even if you're just throwing a rock at a tank. You're still doing something. That's the best that you got. And this is more than a rock at a tank. But with certain things, they just see, with like politicians, like when they get questioned about Building 7. If all else fails, they just make something up. They just say, well, there was probably corners cut in the construction. I mean, they don't know that. They're just throwing it out there. And my biggest fear now, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, I'm not at all, because I love what you're doing. My biggest fear is that we're getting into a stage in American history where the system, when they can't answer something, they just make it up. When there's a law requiring them to do something, they just disobey the law and say, well, we got a zillion lawyers, screw you, we're going to move on. And so I would hate to see that, but the great thing about what you're doing, though, regardless of what happens, and I think there are enough honest people in the system and in the courts to follow the law and do the right thing, and I'm learning that more and more as I move along in this journey of being part of this movement. But regardless, when you force people to act like this, when you force them to disobey their own laws and disobey common sense and reason, you expose them. And I've heard the expression, the best way to expose a tyrant is make him act like one. Show them for who they really are. And so you're putting it right up there. Again, New Yorkers deserve answers when a building collapses. Our safety depends on it. It is so simple. It is such common sense. I love that line. And that really drives it home, and it's really not something that you can argue with, that anyone can argue with. And so, doing this, creating that friction in the gears is what is going to win it for us. And I want to know, from your own opinion, obviously 2009 was in the past. We're in 2014 now. How do you feel the sentiment has changed? Do you think it's changed in your favor for pursuing this initiative? About 9/11 truth, I mean.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I think, we'll see it when we go out and start petitioning in May, that people are immediately in favor of this. As you said, it's really common sense. And when it comes to 9/11, and obviously we go out there and we start petitioning for a new investigation into the collapse of Building 7 and any future high-rise collapses. For a lot of people that will mean, oh, this is part of the 9/11 truth movement. And I think for a majority of New Yorkers, if they sense that, that's not going to be an issue for them. I think that things have warmed up tremendously in the last few years. And the focus on Building 7 is really what wins it. The people that we're working with who are going to be managing this petition drive with us, they're not 9/11 truth activists. They're political, they're political consultants, and they're people that understand petition drives and campaigns, et cetera. They're very much in support of this, just because all it's calling for is a new investigation. And when you see all they had to do was see the collapse of Building 7, and they're like, yeah, that's not right. Clearly, if the government's saying that this came down by fires, and you're telling us that no high-rise has ever collapsed because of fires, that just doesn't make sense. And so you don't have to be, a devout 9/11 truth activist to support this initiative, and that's why we think it's ultimately going to be successful on November 4th.
Right, and that is where politics needs to focus. I mean, that's where it always focuses on, because with any issue, regardless of what it is, if it's 9/11 truth, if it's environmental issues, if it's abortion, things like that, there's always people that are very passionate on either side of it. And then there's the rest of the public, which may be somewhat familiar with the issue, but generally they're just thinking about watching the football game at night and getting their pizza for dinner. And they're just thinking about just whatever their basic needs of life are. And they may have an opinion, but they have varying degrees of passion on it. And just to get new information, they'll be swayed to the other side. And so it becomes almost like you've just got these two passionate minorities fighting with each other, and then the general public will just kind of go with whoever wins. And the battle becomes about swaying that giant tide of public opinion to your side. And that's what's great about Building 7, is that regardless of what people want to believe happened with the bigger picture on 9/11, most folks will look at that and say, that is strange. I mean, they should investigate that. Even if they believe the official story, they'll want to just simply investigate Building 7 to get rid of the controversy, to not hear from people like myself anymore. And so, again, yeah, I mean, this is the absolute way to go, and this is why this particular campaign is so important, and why I'm telling everybody right now to go to high-rise-safety-nyc.org and do whatever you can. You know, even if it's small, just donate that little bit of money, because money is an important thing. Whether anybody likes it or not, this is the reality of the world. And I've done this kind of work, not necessarily with I guess there was some kind of ballot initiative involved, but I've done this with a political party years ago, collecting signatures, things like that. They had to pay us to do that. I don't imagine that you'll be able to pay people to go out and do that footwork. But it does take money to make things happen, especially the things that you want to see happen and things that are revolutionary like this. Now I want to ask you, because I'm curious, when you get to the political aspect of it, when you get into that, it's going to the time when it's going to be on the ballot, and you start educating the public about it. How do you plan to educate the public about it? What's going to be involved in letting everybody know why the high-rise safety initiative needs to pass?
It's going to be a focus on Building 7. We think we have to go out and petition and see how people respond. And we'll learn a lot from petitioning, as we did back in 2009. But we think that, if we raise enough money for the fall campaign, which we think we can once it gets on the ballot, that we'll be able to have TV ads, posters everywhere in the city showing the collapse of Building 7, and just sort of explaining the real basics of the high-rise safety initiative. It's just to require the city to investigate high-rise collapses, including Building 7s. But it's really going to revolve around Building 7, and that's another huge benefit of this campaign. Even if it doesn't pass, if we somehow lose, getting it on the ballot will just create a tremendous amount of public dialogue in the run-up to the election. And it's just a tremendous opportunity for public education. I mean, I think that the local media, will have to pay attention to it if it gets on the ballot, or they don't, and then it sort of flies under the radar and it gets passed just because it's such common sense. When people read it on the ballot when they go to vote, they will vote in favor of it, because it just so like if the media doesn't want to cover it, we also think that we have a very good chance of winning. Regardless. But to go back to your earlier point, we are the money that we are raising. We have to raise $250,000 by June 1st. Will actually go towards paying petitioners, which is what we did back in 2009. It's what any petition drive that has to gather more than a few thousand signatures. Sometimes it's a few thousand for a local, like city council member or state assembly member. But when it's a citywide initiative like this in such a large city as New York, we have to gather over 100,000 signatures, and so that's going to be done mostly by paid petitioners. So that's what the money is for. It's for nothing else other than that, is to collect the signatures, and nobody is really benefiting from it. It's just to get the signatures so that we can get the initiative on the ballot.
Now, I want to know, because I always find when trying to organize anything, a big need resource that is necessary is just general labor and energy from different people to do all these various things like the what you were just describing now with gathering the petitions. If somebody says, okay, I don't want to get paid, I just want to help out as much as I can, and they live in the New York City area, are there opportunities for people simply to volunteer, and how would they do that if there are?
Yeah, we are going to set up those opportunities. There will be weekend canvassing sessions for volunteers. It would definitely be great to raise, to collect 5,000 or 10,000 signatures from volunteer support. That would really help us make sure that we have enough signatures to get on the ballot. As some people might know, the city is going to go through every one of our signatures to check that it's actually a registered voter in New York City. And a lot of signatures get crossed out. That's why while the number that we have to collect is 45,000, that's the official number. We have to go for about 110,000 to make sure that we have enough. And so we definitely will be encouraging and asking people to come out and help collect petition signatures on the weekends in May and June. And we're really looking forward to that. But right now, to get it off the ground, we got to get to that mark of 250,000 by June 1st.
Right, and again, folks, you can go to highrisesafetynyc.org to do that. And I want to ask you, because you mentioned that they cross out signatures. What classifies as a good signature and as a bad signature? In the eyes of New York City.
Yeah. The only thing is that the person has to be on the voter roll, and the signature has to match. So when you go into the voter database, you can go yourself and do it at any Board of Elections office in New York City. You'll see the person's signature and their address, the address where they're registered to vote. And then you'll look at our petition and you'll see, does the address and the signature match? Actually, by law, only the signature has to match. They can have a different address if they've moved. They should update their voter registration, but often people don't, and then they move. And so they'll give us their new address. But by law, all you have to match up is the signature. Now, what the city does and did to us in 2009 was go and say that any signature that didn't have the right address was invalid. And we had to go through the voter rolls, and this was thousands of man hours, of volunteer hours, go through the voter rolls and show that actually these signatures were valid because the signatures matched, even though the address had changed. But that just gives you an example. But yeah, it's we should, with 110,000 signatures, which is our goal, we should be able to exceed the required number of valid signatures, which is 45,000.
Well, that's interesting. Wait a second. So they went through, and even though somebody's allowed to move, I mean, it is conceivable, folks, that somebody might get a new apartment within 5 years or at some point whenever they last registered to vote. So even though it is legal for them to move, and as long as the signatures matched, the system still said these are invalid because the people moved. That's basically
wrong.
What you're saying.
Yeah, it was wrong.
So I don't mean to interrupt. It really doesn't blow my mind anymore because I kind of know how the game is played, but it's so blatant and in your face. I mean, what kind of? I know that you guys challenged it by matching up the signatures and kind of throwing it back to them. But were there any kind of legal challenges, like lawsuits or anything like that basically challenged for being absolutely dead wrong on the law?
Yes. Well, what happened was in 2009, the city challenged our petition saying that we had less than the required number of valid signatures, and that the various provisions of the petition were not legally valid. So the first step in our defense of the petition was to go back and show that we had enough valid signatures, which we did. The city put us at about 4,000 signatures shy of what we needed, and we went through and found 6,000 signatures that should have been marked valid. And once we made that argument, the city actually just backed off and didn't try to, show that the signatures that we had found and identified as valid were invalid. So we basically won that part of the case. and we moved on to the legalities of the petition, which is where we lost. But yeah, it was just through all of this effort in 2009, we learned a tremendous amount, and that's why we are very confident that we will overcome all of those challenges this time around. Like, we really know what we're doing. There's not even that many people that have tried a ballot initiative in New York City once and then tried it again. So like we're going into this like very, very confident about what we're doing. And so it's just a matter of getting the signatures, which is just a matter of raising the funds.
Well, folks, I mean, you hear these stories, and every week, pretty much, anytime we have somebody who's an activist and tries to get things like you're doing pushed forward, we hear these stories. I had a gentleman on who was promised that they would get advertising from a theater that was going to show their 9/11 Truth movie, and that was all part of their agreement that that they normally offer to any kind of group that they're showing their movie, and they didn't do the advertising for them, and they kind of weaseled out of that. And you hear these stories, and I just want to say to the audience, you want to know what it's like to be a 9/11 Truth activist sometimes. It's kind of like watching those old WWF wrestling matches where the good guy's up against the bad guy, and then he starts beating the bad guy manager starts beating on him, and then when he starts fighting back and beating them, then the referee starts wailing on him, and you're fighting everybody in the ring, but we're still going to win because, again, we got the truth on our side, we got the facts, and it's just the right thing to do, and I really believe the universe helps out people when they try their hardest and do their best. Things kind of align in such a way that fortune shines on them. So you are moving forward, and you need people's good energy, people's good thoughts on your side as you're doing this, and you need all the help you can get, I think. So, folks, if you want to help out, when the time comes that Ted and the High-Rise Safety Initiative people helping them are looking for volunteers, I want you out there. If you're out in New York City, to contact them and just let them know whatever you can do. Or even if you can't do it in an official capacity, obviously 9/11 Truth knows that you can do activism on your own. You can you can tell people about it. You can call into talk radio, call into TV shows like C-SPAN and tell them about it. Write letters to the editor. I would tell you to write about it on the Federal Reserve notes, but that would be illegal, and I would never encourage anybody to do that, even though you'd never get caught. So there's so many ways that you can spread the word. The audience knows this, and this is a really good chance of getting this new investigation that we've been seeking since pretty much people started waking up to this. Ted Walter, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Free Fall.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks for listening. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download it at 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.